Good. Where did we get to? Taking off, right? We put the tefillin on, now we got to take them off again, I guess, unless you want to wear them all the time, which is fine by me. So when we come to take off our tefillin, right? So how do we put them on? We put the tefillin shel yad on first, and then we put the tefillin shel rosh on afterwards. The way you undo them, the way to take them off is that you undo. We'll talk about the way that you tie things up onto your hands a little bit later on, and the idea of coming out with a shin over here and a dalet as well. We'll talk about all of that, but in the meantime, you undo the various strappings that you've got on your arm, and then you take off the tefillin shel rosh first. You should take off tefillin shel rosh. You should take off your head tefillin using your left hand. If you are right hand, you should use your left hand. Why is that? Because your left hand, you're just showing that you don't really want to do this, but you have to, right? Your left hand is your weaker hand, and it's just like it's a symbolic thing. We want to show, that we're not in a hurry to take our tefillin off, but when you get to the end of prayers, so that's what you have to do. And then you should, after you've taken off the tefillin shel rosh, you should put it back into its protective box. You should wrap it up, and then you should take off your tefillin shel yad and put that into the protective box and wrap that up as well. So with regards to wrapping the tefillin up after you put them back into their boxes, so even over there are various ideas, various halachas that we've got over here as well. First of all, you should be careful not to wind the straps over the top of the bayit, right? Each tefillin has got a larger square down at the bottom, and then it's got a box that sits on top of that, and the larger square sticks out along the edges on the sides. You should, when you come to put these straps on, when you come to wind it up to put it away, you should not wind the straps over the top of the box, but rather round the sides. So we've got, again, different kinds of things over the tefillin shel yad. So we spoke about the idea that the tefillin shel yad has a little knot on the side. So when you come to wind up your tefillin, some people have the custom not to wind up their tefillin over the knot, so they put everything onto one side and they wind everything up, and you've got all the leather strap sitting on one side of the tefillin. Some people have the custom to wind up on both sides. Again, whatever you're going to do is going to be fine. The tefillin shel rosh, the best way of winding up the tefillin shel rosh is you take the knot. Again, the tefillin shel rosh have got the, bless you, the tefillin shel rosh have got the strap comes around and it's knotted up at the back. We spoke about that yesterday. The daled, what was it the other day? I can't remember. The daled or the double daled, depending on what you've got, whether it's a right angle or whether it's a square over there, that should be placed on top of the protective box and not underneath. It's a little unwieldy. You have to get used to doing it, because the most obvious place to put the thing is at the bottom, because it's sitting at the bottom anyway, and that way it would be the neatest. But rather we want to treat the knot is the most holy part of the straps themselves, where it's been knotted up. So you should put it on the top of the box instead. Yeah.
You're saying when you're wrapping shel yad, some people use both sides of the box. When you're starting out, you're going to run into that. I can't remember what it's called, the Hebrew term for the knot.
Right.
Pretty quickly. What did you say? What do you do to if you're using the both sides? What do you do first with that?
The knot.
Yeah.
You put the knot back into you put the tefillin, the head tefillin back into the protective box.
Yeah.
Right? And you now want to wind up all the straps. You take the knot and put it on the top, not on the bottom. Again, you've got the protective box
on the top of the box itself.
Yeah, the protective box looks pretty much like the tefillin themselves. So you've got a larger place at the bottom, and then you've got the box in the middle itself, the square part in the middle itself that's sticking up.
And then you wrap around that. Then you start.
So what you should do is you should take the knot and you place that on top of the lower part, the piece that sticks out around the side, but on the top, not on the bottom. Okay. Even though on the bottom is a more comfortable way of doing it, that's a more practical way of doing it. Nevertheless, you put it on the top, because that's a sign. It's a sign of respect.
But and so the straps that you're wrapping on both sides aren't touching that, right? Is that
Right. The way that it works out in the end is that you'll have the knot will be sitting in the middle, and the straps will be sitting on either side,
all right?
going around the edges.
Okay.
Right.
Good.
Another thing that you're supposed to do, you're supposed to kiss your tefillin when you take them out, when you put them back. Right. Again, signs of respect. You know, you should kiss your mother as well. I mean, it's also a sign of respect. I don't know. Did anyone tell you this? I don't know. You don't look very excited about the idea, but whatever. It's a good idea to kiss your mother from time to time, especially if she's just given you something like a present of some kind. That's how you get more presents. Yeah, stick with me. I'll tell you how to deal with these things. Interestingly enough, even when you're putting your tefillin back into the bag, right? You would have thought that putting your tefillin back into the bag, you can put it back however you want, but there are ideas about that as well, interestingly enough. So first of all, a person, you should be careful to put your tefillin back the same way every day, so that when you come to take them out, you should take out the tefillin sharosh first. You should take out the tefillin shayad first. The hand tefillin should come out first. If you know which side it's on, the right hand or the left side, and that's where you put it every single day, then you won't have any questions about, you know, you just put your hand in, you'll pull it out, take out the tefillin shayad and start putting it on without having to fish around in there to work out which one is which. However, the predominant custom is to put the tefillin shayad on the right-hand side of the bag facing you. The right-hand side is considered to be the more important side. That way also, when you come to take out the tefillin, you're not reaching across the other tefillin in order to take the tefillin out. Just an interesting halacha when you, if you borrow somebody else's tefillin, so you should take note of how they're put away and where they are inside the bag, so that when you come to put the tefillin away again, you should put them away in the same way. They should go back in the same order. Okay, let's talk about sort of other things now. From when are you allowed to put your tefillin on? Well, you're allowed to put your tefillin on from what's called Amud Ashachar. Amud Ashachar is the dawn. Now, the dawn and sunup are two very different things. And there can be quite a big gap between the two, depending on where you live and depending on what time of the year it is. So it's permissible to put your tefillin on from Amud Ashachar. You'll find yourself not really being able to pray very much from the dawn, because you're supposed to pray the Amidah, you're supposed to pray the silent prayer is supposed to be prayed with the sun up. Right? Now again, you know, in some places you can have quite a big gap between the two, between the dawn and between the sun up, which means that many people like to put on their tefillin early, and then they sit down and they learn, and they immerse themselves in spiritual dimensions before they begin praying, and that's no problem at all. You can wear your tefillin until the shkir, until the sun sets. So again, what happens if somebody gets up and they haven't had an opportunity to put their tefillin on for whatever the reason? We're not going to get involved in you know, whether they've been lying around in bed for too long, or you know, I mean, nobody here would be able to relate to that particularly, right? It's not something we can really, you know, right? Oh, I know. You started learning a little something before you put your tefillin on, right? A little piece of Torah or something, a little bit of Talmud, and you became so engrossed that the next thing you knew, it was already towards the end of the day. You know, you just spent hours and hours and hours completely and absolutely, you know. Does that? I don't know. Nobody seems to be able to relate to the examples that I'm giving today for some reason. I don't know why. Hold on a second. Too much Torah study, right? Let me just finish up the idea. So you're allowed to put on your tefillin all day long, which means you haven't put your tefillin on in the morning for whatever the reason. It's not that we wear our tefillin when we daven the morning prayers, but they're not necessarily attached to each other, which means it's possible to pray the morning prayers without your tefillin, and it's possible to put on your tefillin without the morning prayers. Right, so say, for example, somebody, they've left it, you know, they stayed over by a friend overnight and they don't have to fill in with them, but they want to go and pray. They can go and pray, you know, shacharit. They can go and pray in the shul together with everybody else, and they won't have their tefillin on. And afterwards, they can either borrow a pair of tefillin, or they can wait until they come home and they can put their tefillin on at home, so long as they're coming back before sunset. why are you supposed to take off tefillin when it gets to sunset? Because you're not supposed to fall asleep wearing tefillin. It's considered to be a terrible disgrace to the tefillin if you fall asleep whilst you're wearing them. That's something, by the way, which is applicable regardless. So if you get up in the morning and you put on your tefillin and you go to pray and you're very tired and you find yourself falling asleep, so you should really stop and take off your tefillin and then carry on praying in the hope that, hopefully you'll stay awake whilst you're praying. But nevertheless, you shouldn't fall asleep with your tefillin on. So you shouldn't wear your tefillin at night, because night is normally a time for sleeping, unless, of course, you are a college student. And then night is sort of pretty much the time you begin to get up. And, and then the day is...
But then in that case, you can wear your tefillin if you're not going to sleep at night.
So it's interesting that there's a concept in halacha, in Jewish law, which goes across the board. It's something called loy plug. Loy plug means that we don't make exceptions under normal circumstances, which means that when the rabbis came along and said don't wear your tefillin at night, so even though there are several scenarios where it may make perfect sense to put on your tefillin at night, somebody, for example, who's working night shifts, right? So they sleep during the day and they get up at,
if you're more up north and it's the whole...
Oh, you know what, over there?
It's night.
Yeah.
It's the whole time night. So.
Right, well, actually, what do they do over there? That's an interesting thing. I think over there...
Nightmare.
Gosh. I've never heard you so emotional before. Wow.
I lived in Alaska.
He's from north.
Oh, yeah?
3 years.
How long?
3 years.
For 3 years. When?
This was whenever I was like 5, but my father, he used to say it's a halachic nightmare up here. He was in the army, and...
Oh, okay, right. I mean, the emphasis like this, it's interesting. There's a fascinating tshuva from somebody called Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who was the halakhic authority of the Jewish world from the previous generation. And he added, there was an Orthodox geologist who was working for the American government who got posted to Alaska. And he wanted to know what to do about Shabbos. He was there in the winter. And there's a few weeks over there in the winter where the sun doesn't come up at all. So Rav Moshe Feinstein over there ruled in a very fascinating, very innovative way. He ruled that Shabbos is 25 hours worth of holiness, and each Friday you can bring in Shabbat, at whichever point you want to, so long as you keep it for 25 hours.
Nice.
Even though there was no way of knowing, because there was no sun up and there was no sun down. So, for example, 1 week you could finish work. Let's say you got all your work done by 4 o'clock. You can bring in Shabbos and take it out the next day at 5 o'clock in the evening. The next week you're busy, and you don't finish till 9 o'clock at night. So you could bring in Shabbos at 9 o'clock at night and take it out at 10 o'clock the next night. It's an interesting thing. I would imagine like this. It's probably worth looking into. Bli Neder. So perhaps you should look into it. I think that it's clear that somebody who's living in an area where there is no sun, right? So you're going far north. It's clear that every day is a defined day, right? Ask your father, right? So he gets up, whatever time he has to get up, he got up, and his day progressed through. And there was a semblance of a morning, an afternoon, and an evening, even though it's dark the whole time outside. So I would imagine that in a situation like that, you would put on your tefillin in the regular way. Right? So you wear your tefillin. Most people wear their tefillin when they daven the morning services. So you get up in the morning and you daven the morning services. You put on your tefillin even though it's pitch black outside. That's what I would imagine is the situation. We're not talking about somebody who, because it's dark outside, the person is going to sleep, because if that's the case, then they're going to be asleep for several weeks. Right? You could have a great Shabbos afternoon sleep, that's for sure, right? Up there in Alaska, you can. But I don't. That's really not the case. People are living their lives under the pretense of living regular, normative lives like everybody else. What is fascinating, which has got nothing to do with tefillin, actually, is that Scandinavia, which suffers from the same problem, parts of Norway upwards are shrouded in darkness, and the other way around in the summer they've got the land of the midnight sun. But what is fascinating is that in Scandinavian countries, the suicide rate in the winter is very, very high.
And depression too.
I think that living without sun is something which we take it all for granted. We don't realize just how much of an impact it has on us, right? And when they live over there in these dark areas, and in the winter when there's no real sun, and they get lots of depression and suicide. The suicide rate is pretty high.
I didn't really mind it so much in Alaska. They had an ice rink and I could go ice skating, so I enjoyed that.
Good. Okay.
I guess living in an environment like that pretty much does away with the idea of bringing in Shabbos early. I guess that wouldn't even exist.
No, I guess not. Right? I mean, you've got nothing really to measure it from. So, like Rav Moshe Feinstein said, just bring it in, bring in Shabbos. Whenever it's convenient for you, bring it in.
So there are exceptions to when you put a tefillin on.
Yeah, that sounds. Yeah, I mean, I think when you're working under extraordinary situations, then it's okay to make an exception. When you're working under a situation which is not so extraordinary, so somebody who's working nights, but somebody who works nights is not awake only when it's nighttime. Right, so even in the winter when the days are pretty short, but you know what? I mean, a person can get himself up an hour earlier in order to make sure that he's going to put on his tefillin whilst there's daylight outside. For somebody like that, I think the concept of loy plug, which is not to make exceptions, is going to be applicable, right? When you're in a place where it's not possible to put on your tefillin when it's daytime outside, then that's when you maybe you'll be able to apply the exceptions. My parents were my mother wanted to see this Midnight Sun. Did you ever see it?
No.
She said it was absolutely fascinating. I mean, you went out, in the middle of the night in the summer. I can't remember which part of Norway was it. That's where they went to. That's like the first part in Europe, the first place that you can see this. And you go out in the middle of the night at 2:00 in the morning. You've got a great big ball of sun in the sky. She said, but what was fascinating was that you see the sun go down and then go up again. It just never dips below the horizon, so it never gets dark. But there are identifiable days, which means as the sun begins to go up again, you know that it's now the next day. Yeah. They had a question about when to make Havdalah. If they were there for Shabbos, when to make Havdalah, when do you know Shabbos has gone out? So the answer was the minute you see the sun beginning to work its way back up again. So now you know that that Shabbos has gone out and the new day has begun.
Or you also have the opposite. I think if you're in space, you have a lot of day and nights.
Oh,
like
yeah.
16 day and nights.
Whilst you're orbiting. Whilst you're orbiting, yeah.
It's also interesting. Right?
Yeah, they sent up, this fellow Chaim Ramon, who went up in the spacecraft in, how long ago was this? I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. Unfortunately, as it came back, it was destroyed. Everybody inside it died. But he had a question about putting on tefillin. When does a person put on tefillin in space? You've orbited 16 times. It's like, get them off, put them on, get them off, put them on. It's like, another day's gone by, another day's gone by. Time really flies when you're enjoying yourself, that's for sure. So he was told over there, he was also told an interesting thing, take 24-hour blocks of time. And within the 24-hour block of time, you're supposed to put your tefillin on once and, pray the morning service and pray the afternoon service and pray the evening service. And that's the way to do it. But you're right. I mean, you're in a situation which is no longer being governed by, our laws of nature. They're being governed by other laws of nature instead. And what does a person do? I'm not convinced that, that an Orthodox Jew should become a astronaut. I mean, aside from the fact that most Orthodox Jews are very overweight, so the spacesuit itself would be very expensive for sure. Right? But aside from that, I mean, just the complicated issues of halacha they're fascinating. They really are. If you've got a sun up and a sun down. How many is it 16 within a 24-hour period or something? You go, of course. But whatever, I mean, you've certainly got, right, yeah. 16 within a 24-hour, I mean, you've got 2 Shabboses, right? I mean, how do you do this? If you ask me, Erev Shabbos, right, Friday is mad enough when you've got a 7-day week. Imagine if you had to go through 2 of these in 24 hours. trying to get the cholent ready. I mean, that's like, you know, the mind boggles. What can I tell you?
But the thing what you say is like in exceptional circumstances, you should, like in law, they have this kind of term which is called the spirit of the law.
Yeah.
So you should stick to basically what it's for instead of just following maybe the rule to the letter.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
I
Is
think,
that a
which
little
I
bit
think
what
like
you
this. I think in general, we're supposed to follow the letter of the law.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly enough, in Jewish law, anyway, the spirit of the law is always going to be a part of what you're doing as well. Which means, for example, you know, here an example. They're all kinds of things you can't do on Shabbos, right? So a person may say to themselves, you know what, I'll get into bed and I won't get out, and that way I won't transgress anything because I stayed in bed the whole of Shabbos, which is true, you won't transgress anything, but you haven't fulfilled the spirit of what Shabbos is all about. So within Jewish law, the idea of the spirit being, it's a very important dimension of what you're doing. Otherwise, everything becomes very dry, and it becomes very, you know, it becomes very detailed, and it it's not very enjoyable. It's really not. You know, a person's got to want to do all of this stuff. There's a beautiful story they tell. Rav Aaron Kotler, who was the famous Rosh Yeshiva, he opened up the yeshiva in Lakewood in New Jersey. He was once taken to a very wealthy person to ask for a donation, and the fellow wrote out a pretty impressive check, and he gave it to Rav Aaron Kotler, and he said to Rav Aaron Kotler, he asked him if he would give him a blessing, right? Giving him a nice check, you know, give me a blessing in return. So Rav Aaron Kotler said to this wealthy businessman, he said to him, I give you a blessing that you should merit to be able to, you know, to hear Torah from the mouth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu 24 hours a day. The mouth of God, 24 hours a day. So this fellow looks at Rav Aaron Kotler, he says, Rabbi, he says, I'm a businessman. He says, maybe you have a blessing that's a little bit more, you know, suited for me, right? So Rav Aaron Kotler looked at me, he says, no, he says, you don't understand. He says, that's going to be anyway. He says, my blessing is that you should want it. And that really is the underlying theme, that, you know, we shouldn't make the mistake of thinking that the mitzvahs that we're doing God a favor by doing them, but rather we're obligated to keep the commandments. We're obligated to, if we're already obligated, so let's work on doing them in the best way that we can. And how's this for a revolutionary idea? Enjoying them. I don't want to frighten. I don't want to frighten anybody. I really don't. But I was kind of hoping no one was listening at that point. But try it and see. You know, what can I tell you? They're pretty enjoyable things to do if you put your mind to it. My brother, I've got a brother who's a doctor who I remember when he was going through his residency, and you know, the hours that he kept were wild. You know, you had to be on call for whatever, like 36 hours straight, and then you went straight back to work, and it was crazy. And he had a question when he was working nights about what to do with wearing tefillin. You know, at what point is he supposed to put them on? He could have put them on when he came back in the morning, he said, but he was wiped out. So I remember the psak that he was given, the ruling that he was given, that he should do his best to get up, to wake up a little bit, you know, whilst there's still some light outside, and to put on his tefillin then, and to fulfill the mitzvah that way. And the emphasis, I'm sure that if it's not possible, I'm sure that you know, you can find somebody who'll be able to tell you that it's okay to put them on at night time, right? If it's really impossible for a person to be able to do that. You've got people who work in certain jobs, for example, doctors who, you know, sometimes they are just completely and absolutely incapable of doing anything during daylight hours because they're so completely absorbed in what they're doing. Surgeons that get involved in complicated surgery, you know, they can't just sort of get up in the middle and say, oh gosh, you know, oh, look at the time, I'm sorry, you know, if you could just hold this artery for a minute or two, I just got to go outside and pray, you know. I mean, you can't do these things, right? So for somebody like that, would it be okay for him to put on his tefillin at night time? I would imagine that there's probably enough leeway to be able to say that it's okay to do. It's not applicable to, you know, it's not applicable over here in the yeshiva if somebody just didn't bother getting out of bed. Again, not something that anyone can relate to over here, right? But obviously, if somebody just didn't bother getting out of bed. So it's not really going to help. Okay, the tefillin themselves, how are we going to define what they are? The pasuk, the verse in the Torah says that tefillin are an ot al yadecha, they're a sign upon your hand, the totafot beinenecha. So we spoke a little bit about the concept of totafot, what frontlets, what totafot are. An ot is a very important concept inside of halacha Jewish law. There are basically three signs that God gave us that we are His chosen nation. One of them is Tefillin, the other is Shabbat, and the third one is Brit Milah, right? Circumcision. However, the halacha tells us that we're only required to have two of them at any one time. That's one of the reasons why we don't wear tefillin on Shabbos. You don't have to wear tefillin on Shabbos because Shabbos is itself an ot. Bris Milah, the circumcision, is something which a person carries with them the whole time. They have that whether it's Shabbat or whether it's not Shabbat. So if you've got Shabbat and Brit Milah, you've got two. If you've got Tefillin and Brit Milah, you've got two. And you don't have to wear Tefillin on Shabbos itself.
What about for women? Just
Again, the halachas over here, women are exempt from keeping time-bound positive mitzvot. Which means, so the mitzvah of wearing tefillin, women are exempt from keeping anyway.
and the Shabbat?
Shabbos they have to keep. That's something which overrides everything, right? But again, they also don't have a bris milah, so it's something which is, I guess it's applicable over here. It's applicable only to men. There's an interesting thing. If you take a look at your tefillin show yad, right? If you're familiar with putting on tefillin, and you look at your arm tefillin, you'll see that when you take it out of the box, it's got a second black plastic box on top of it, with a little hole in the top. Or if you're wearing Chabad tefillin, with a big hole in the top, right? Because it's a big piece of tefillin. You don't have that on your tefillin shorosh, right? Why is that? So there are two. One is a very practical reason. One is a more spiritual reason. We'll start with the spiritual reason. Because it is an ot, because it's a sign, it is something which is private between ourselves and God. And it's interesting that the tefillin shel yad is called an ot al yadecha. That's a sign on your arm, and the tefillin shel rosh is called totafot beinenecha. It's got a different classification. It's not considered to be an ot. If it's not an ot, it doesn't have to be hidden. However, the tefillin shel yad, because it has a designation of being an ot, so there's an extra box which covers it up. However,
the smaller one,
the black.
right?
Once you've taken it out of its protective covering,
right,
and you're left now with the tefillin, you'll see that on the tefillin shel yad there is a extra plastic cover that goes over it. That again, it's been cut around to make sure that the knot sits against it, and it's got a hole in the top. That's in order to allow you to be able to kiss it. You have to be able to have access to the tefillin, right? However, you wear it on top, that's considered to be a way of covering up the ot, covering up the sign. There's also a very practical dimension as well, which Amit Hashem will talk about, not today, the concept of the squareness of your tefillin. Each corner has to be a right angle. It's got to be a sharp right angle. If you wear your tefillin up here, and like many people do, you cover it up with your sleeve. You pull your sleeve down when you pray. Well, by pulling the sleeve down over the tefillin, over the space of time, you'll find that at least the two corners at the top are going to start to be worn away a little bit. After all, these things are made out of leather, and leather it's not the strongest material around, and friction will cause it to erode a little bit, to lose its pointed corner. And so another reason why we have that black protective box on the tefillin shel yad is because every time you pull your shirt sleeve back over it, in order to pull your shirt sleeve down, it's not going to rub away the corner, and your tefillin are going to retain their kosher status. Yeah.
I seem to notice more often the smaller one being removed before davening.
Yeah. I don't know why people do that. I don't have a clue.
Until now, I thought that's what you're supposed to do.
No,
They only wear
no.
the small ones for certain prayers if they're wearing both. So like they say.
Well, no. I'm just saying a single shalyad that
With that extra protective black box on top of it. I don't know why people would take them off.
I think maybe they think pulling the shirt down in itself.
Well,
is,
pulling the shirt down in itself takes care of covering up the tefillin, right? Which means that if you're concerned about, you don't want this sign to be open to everybody, so pulling your shirt down over your tefillin will take care of the problem. The only thing is, like I said before, that pulling your shirt down over the tefillin is a pretty sure recipe of rubbing away the sharpness of the corner. Now again, we'll learn these things together in Mitzvah Shem, but you should know that if the corners have been rubbed away, if they're now rounded and they're not sharp angles, then the tefillin are no longer kosher and they need to be taken care of. Right? It's relatively simple to get these things fixed, but nevertheless, it's something you need to be aware of.
And it costs money.
Well, what is money? Actually, if you teach in yeshiva, that question is really quite a practical one. What is money? Never see this stuff. On very rare occasions, I have seen people wearing a little black protective box on their tefillin shel rosh as well, but only ever people who wear their tefillin all day long. Right? For most people, when you put your tefillin on, when you go to synagogue, right, and you put your tefillin on, you're not going to do anything over there that's going to put the one on your head into any kind of a dangerous situation, right? It's not going to touch anything. It's not going to bang against anything. It's not going to rub against anything, right? But if you wear your tefillin all day long, so you know what, you've got to be a little bit more careful about where you go, where you turn. I mentioned.
Anyway, you have to be more careful then, right?
Yeah, certainly, mentally you've got to be more careful. You've got to be aware of the fact you're wearing them the whole time, that's for sure. But I'm saying practically as well, physically you need to be a little bit more careful as well. Just miscalculating the amount of space that you've got to get through a door, for example, you could knock your tefillin and you could do all kinds of damage to them, which you really shouldn't be doing. Right? So on very rare occasions I have seen people wearing a cover on top of their tefillin shel rosh, but it's not for religious purposes, that's really just for very practical purposes. What about wearing a watch? Can you wear your watch when you are putting your tefillin on? Again, most people wear their watch on their left hand, most people put their tefillin on their left hand. So when you come and you put the tefillin on and you start winding it around and you get down to here to where your watch is, what happens next? Right? Can you or can't you? So the emphasis is that it's okay to keep your watch on and you can just put the straps on top of the watch and keep going. However, if you've got a watch with a leather strap, the Mishnah Berurah recommends taking off the watch and not wearing it whilst you're wearing your tefillin. There shouldn't be any kind of a misunderstanding over here between the different leather of the watch strap and the leather of the tefillin themselves. One last halacha for today, Mitzvah Hashem, and then we'll stop over here, and then who knows, tomorrow maybe we'll meet, weather permitting, maybe we won't. If we all daven hard that the snow starts early, then we don't have to meet. Okay, if all of us except you daven hard that the snow start early, then
I love snow.
Oh gosh. Okay. One last thing over here. What do you do if a person's wearing a cast? Right. It happens. Unfortunately, people break their arms. If you're talking about a cast which is from the elbow downwards, so you should wear your tefillin in the regular place. You should put it up over here and make the blessing in the regular fashion. And then when you come to wind it around, just wind it around over the cast, even though it's not, that we spoke about this the other day, it's considered to be a break between what's called a chatzitza. It's a how do you say this?
Separation.
Separation between the straps of the tefillin and your arm, right? But nevertheless, because you don't have any alternative, you're wearing a cast, you should put them on anyway. if a person, not you, if one has a cast which is more extensive than that, sometimes casts go up, right? The major part of the arm is now covered in a cast, or a person, sometimes when they've dislocated their shoulders, so they end up with a cast that makes it impossible for them to put their tefillin on. If the tefillin can't sit on the arm, on the bicep itself, then at that point you're now absolved from your obligation to wear the tefillin shel yad, but you should still put on your tefillin shel rosh. Right, which means whatever you can put on, that's what you should put on. Vice versa as well. If a person had some kind of a problem with their head, and right now they can't put the tefillin shel rosh on, so for example they've got stitches and it's not possible for them to put the head tefillin on, they should still put on the tefillin shel yad, make the blessing over it, and so they're fine. Right now they can't fulfill the mitzvah, the commandment of wearing the head tefillin. Yeah.
Can I ask a question now, that if that's the last of what you were going to be? Well, no, it is sort of related. It's on the shel yad, like the shel rosh and the precaution you take in wrapping it to protect the double dalet or other single dalet.
Yeah.
Is there a similar precaution on shel yad?
Well, in the tefillin shel yad, what you really have is just one very long strap.
Right,
that comes down. So you've got the knot that is tied against the bayit itself, against the square part of the tefillin itself. And so, like I did mention before, that some people, when they come to wind up their tefillin, are careful not to wind over that knot. So they'll wind everything on the other side. Right, on the left-hand side of the tefillin, they'll just put a great big, just keep going round and round and round and round and round until they get to the end. And it comes up pretty high because, again, there's quite a lot of strap over there. Other people wrap on both sides. They're just careful not to wrap. They'll wrap next to the knot and not on top of the knot itself.
Thank you.
Okay, good. I'm going to take this silence as, rapt attention.
Wrapped,
yeah. Not wrapped, wrapped. Good. We're gonna stop over in Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow. We'll have to keep going.